This generation is lazy, entitled, and think the world revolves around them. Sound familiar? If you're older, you've probably said it. If you're younger, you've probably heard it. And if you're a little bit older, you've probably done both. So, but here's the part nobody talks about. People have been saying this about the next generation for thousands of years. Socrates said of the next generation, the children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They're not the same as the previous generation, lacking discipline and focus. Socrates taught Plato, right? Horace in the first century BC said, beardless youth does not foresee what is youthful, squandering his money. And in the 1993, the Washington Post published what really distinguishes this generation from those before it is that it's the first generation in American history to live so well to complain so bitterly about it. So obviously, everyone probably has an example from their own life, but we're going to talk about what this means in business culture. What does it mean at work when you have different generations working together and mixing together and learning to accomplish the same goal? So have you seen this in your history, in your work history?
You know, it's interesting. That's always comes to mind for me as well when people talk about the younger generation. It's amazing as I get to work with not only senior executives, people who are very far along in their careers. I do get to work with emerging leaders as well, and or work with people who are working with younger people. It's amazing when I get to participate or interact with the younger generation, how often I look and think, man, I wish I'd have had it that together when I was their age. I wish I'd have been that bright. I wish I'd have been that good at planning, saving, getting an education. So I see young people now doing wonderful things. You kind of see the spectrum, and you always have, right? You also see young people who aren't making very wise decisions and seem to be pushing self-destruct buttons all the time. I can remember being pretty young and I didn't always drive the speed limit and I didn't always do the safest things. So, and I didn't always make the wisest decisions. And all my decisions aren't wise even still. So it's interesting. I just always feel like we're so much more alike than we are different. I did a little bit of looking into this, and one of the things we see when it comes to the similarities of Gen Z and the Boomer generation, and I'm kind of the very tail. At one point, I was considered no generation at all because I was born at the very end of the Boomer generation, born in 1960. So now it looks like that it expands. And so I've been graciously included now in the Boomer generation by somebody because now
Yeah.
that number that year is included. But Gen Z and Boomers both have very traditional milestones that they aim for. They'd love to own a home. They want to have a family, get married. Um, Gen Z and Boomers tend to be very fiscally responsible. Uh, you know, the Boomers grew into maturity during the economic recessions of the 70s and 80s, and Gen Z was growing up when the we hit the deep recession of 2008, 2009, and COVID. So we've gone through some pretty similar things there as well. Also, Gen Z has a pretty good work ethic. They're willing to set goals and work for them, generally, as a group of people. The differences are probably come into line with workplace boundaries. Boomers are kind of famous for or are known for getting a job and sticking with it their whole career. I grew up with that. My parents taught me, get a job, stick with it, you'll have a great retirement. And yet, I happened to watch my dad was a World War II veteran, came home, got a job. He was a truck driver, worked for the Union, worked as a big chunk of his career, many decades, worked for one company. And right before he was ready to retire, that company went out of business and took his pension with it. So I watched him get jobs driving dump trucks locally for people who just happened to own an old truck and they needed somebody to drive with. He really basically worked himself until the very end of his life. His health wasn't good. He worked all the time because instead of having a wonderful retirement that he worked for his whole life, that was gone, and he had to just keep working. So I didn't end up with the same mindset of many people my age whose parents worked for a company their whole lives and had this wonderful retirement and got a Winnebago and started cruising the country or went down to Florida or Arizona and became snowbirds. I didn't get to see that. I ended up with no real sense of I'm going to stick with this company my whole life. And I think that for me was a blessing. It gave me mobility. It didn't give me um, security that might have come, but it gave me that the opportunity and the courage and the perspective to say I would rather count on myself and run my own business than trust that someone else running a business is going to make life safe for me. That way, even if things go poorly, I've got no one to blame but myself. I'm okay with that.
So
So
you feel like that it just gives you a bit of a relatability, a, a shared sense of, oh, I get you.
yeah,
When with the younger generations who also saw that with the 2008 financial crisis, who saw that with just the sense that sticking with one company isn't always going to be the best thing. So you lose that company loyalty that the older generations might be a bit more known for.
exactly. Another example of that is one of the perceived differences between the boomers and Gen Z is going to be how they see authority, right? Boomers can tend to think, well, you follow the chain of command. Even throughout my career, I've heard people say, oh, you need to follow the chain of command, follow the chain of command. When I was in executive roles and I would see someone in my from my team in talking to my boss, I always thought, fine, you know, but I've known other people that would get really upset. You're supposed to follow the chain of command. You don't talk to my boss, you talk to me. I would just look and think, well, I trust my boss. We have a pretty good working relationship. I trust the people who work for me. So if they're going in there, maybe they're just having a great conversation and getting some good mentoring. If they are going in there to complain about me, all right. If it's something they didn't feel safe talking to me about, then my boss is going to come tell me about it and I can fix it. Right. So I'm okay either way. I'm going to make it work. So I don't tend to worry so much about chain of command where a lot of people my age and older did. Um, I watched my mom with this in my, we just talked about my dad's later years and his health was failing. Um, my mom talked about this because early on, she would just follow whatever the doctor's orders were. Doctor says this, do this. And she learned to her own horn. She was highly intelligent, a great reader, a great learner. She applied that to health and the wellness of her husband. And so she learned to do the research, to look up what are the side effects. He's on these four medications. What are the interactions that I'm not hearing about? So she was able to go in to the pharmacist or the doctor and ask much more pointed questions and get better results because she had the right questions to ask. And she knew how to, she stopped not challenging authority, right? Double negative. She began to be comfortable challenging authority. I think that's important, right? And we can challenge authority respectfully and in a way that leads to collaboration. One of the first things I tell an executive is, or I ask an executive is who challenges your thinking? If nobody is challenging your thinking, you're in trouble because you're going to get on the wrong track and there will be no course corrections. So I think even with that, the idea of having of us being so different. When I hear people talk about the things that younger generations care about, I think they care about that. I actually had I was working with a the leadership cabinet of a college as as their leadership coach, and I met with one of the younger members of the team, much younger, and she looked at me and said, "Well, actually, it's your generation that has caused all these problems with pollution and the environment and that sort of thing." And I thought, "You don't know me as an individual." And that's the point I think we really need to make is, do we know people as individuals? I grew up in grade school. We lived up by the Maumee Bay of Lake Erie, and we had outings where we went and picked garbage up to help clean up the lake. When I was young, the Cuyahoga River caught fire, and that's been turned around. So many places that were so much worse are so much better because my generation cared. There a lot of the things we were hearing, doing, singing at that time was about turning around this pollution and the destruction that was starting to happen with industrialization, right? Core to our business is understanding how to create a regenerative culture as opposed to an industrialized culture in your business so that you're not burning out, using up, ruining, destroying, polluting the culture of your company, whether it's natural resources in the environment or human resources in your culture. So I think as we see all of that, we can see that we have, as I listen to the differences that we, or the supposed differences of younger people, I think, no, I care about that too. The people my age that I know talk about that, care about that. So I
I
think when we
think
go ahead, thank you.
so it sounds like one, we're more alike than we are different. And there's more danger in labeling people and putting them in boxes than there is in the differences. There's more danger in looking at someone saying, ah, you're Gen Z, you're Gen Alpha, you're Gen Millennial, right? I'm a millennial technically, than just looking at them as an individual and saying, okay, what does this person need? What do we have in common? What is our shared goal? If you like to climb mountains on your in your free time and not go to the beach, who cares? If you like to do your work on your laptop, sitting with your feet against a wall, and I sit at a desk, who cares? Labels are less important than people.
Yeah. I have a mentor of mine years ago had a statement. He said, some people just suffer from hardening of the categories. And that's what this is, right? We put people in categories, whether it's their generation or their politics or their race or their whatever. And they suffer from hardening of the categories and they forget the individual. I worked with an executive once who was roughly my age, and she was talking about how great she was at leading this younger generation. She understood them so deeply and so thoroughly. She studied the younger generation, let's say the Gen Z generation. She knew what they cared about. She knew that they cared about the environment. She knew that they cared about, job security. She knew all these things about this Gen Z. So she was, in essence, a Gen Z whisperer, I guess, right? She just knew how to connect. And as I listened, I finally told her, I said, if I were in my 20s and I worked for you, I would feel insulted, disrespected, and disregarded. And she said, "Oh, how dare you say that to me?" And I said, the reason I could say that is because you don't know me. You think because you know my category, you know me, and that you don't have to go through the trouble of getting to know me as an individual, to listen to me, to ask me questions. Had something very similar happen, nothing to do with generations, was working with an executive team a while back, and they were going through, if you're familiar with the DISC surveys, the DISC, and and each one knew their own profile. And so the the CEO started out his executive team meeting by saying, okay, since you're a high D and I'm a high, or you're a high C and I'm a high D, it means this. And you're you're an I, so that means that since I'm a high C, you know, and finally after just a few minutes of this, the COO looked at him and said, look, just knock it off. Stop it. And he said, what? He said, stop it. He said, you think just because you know our disc profile, you know all there is to get. You've stopped asking questions. You've stopped having conversations. There's no dialogue. You just put us in our category and now you know everything you need to know on how we work together. So the CEO is kind of taken aback and a little offended. You know, how dare you? I'm trying to show how sensitive and thoughtful I am by no, understanding your profile, right? So he looked at me and said, yeah, John, what do you think? I said, he's absolutely right. You're disregarding them as human beings and you're putting them in categories. It, when you learn a little bit about what it means to be to what's it mean to grow up right now that we didn't experience when I grew up. What's it mean to have this profile rather than that profile? What does it mean to be this race rather than that race, or this gender rather than that gender? If we do a little bit of homework, hopefully it helps us ask better questions, not have all the answers, right? The answers come from the dialogue. The answers don't come from the research without human interaction. AI is not going to tell me everything I need to know about you, Rebecca Eyre, right? Just because it can say, well, she grew up in this, here are all the factors, and here's, you know, that might help me come up with more intelligent questions. It won't give me better answers. It won't give me the answers. So I think that's the thing is are we still seeing people as individuals and are we interacting? Ask questions, learn, reflect. So so when it comes to interacting with other categories, right? And there aren't other categories. We're all human beings. I work with people. People ask me, well, do you know how to work with medical practices? Well, it turns out, yes, I have, and yes, I do. Do you know how to work with um, construction companies? Yes, I have, and yes, I do. And oftentimes they'll say, well, you don't understand because, right? And I can say, well, I may not understand everything, but I understand a lot because we're all people, right? I work with people who work with other people to serve people, who work with other people who provide them products and resources so that they can serve people. So it's a people thing, and it's one category, just people. So if we look at take 70% and build on the things we have in common and then identify those things that are different and learn from them rather than judge them, we'll make a whole lot more progress. So I think those are
All
some.
right. I like that. Do your research so you can ask better questions, not have all the answers.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums it up, right?
Yeah. What you're doing is you're enabling dialogue, right? Good decisions come from good information. Good information comes from good dialogue. So if you want to make good decisions as a leader, learn how to listen. I love the mathematical equation, one mouth, two ears, you do the math. We should be listening twice as much as I shouldn't be telling someone about themselves because I understand their category to show how open I am.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
You very much.